Very much. It's a great pleasure this afternoon to introduce Professor Konrad from Kiel University. And amongst many things that Konrad has worked on, is a sort of truly transdisciplinary project called the Future Ocean Project, where philosophers and theologians and scientists, mathematicians all work together on common projects. So this is really relevant to some of our planning here with the MSI, and so we've invited Konrad here to tell us a little bit about his experiences in Germany and Kiel University, how we can perhaps take some of the nuggets of information, good advice to apply to our plans for our Green Studies project. So Konrad.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks for inviting me here. And I started this with a disclaimer. I'm not a marine scientist. I'm a philosopher who works together with marine scientists since 5 or 6 years at Kiel University, who is located in the northern part of Germany, north of Hamburg, close to the Baltic and close to the border of Denmark. And I'm in a group of scholars who have conceived an idea we want to perform in years to come, and this is future ocean sustainability. And in the next 30 minutes, I will give you an overview about future ocean sustainability as it stands now. There is a growing population, and there will be increased demands on the ocean space, food, transport, materials, energy, fisheries, tourism, pollution, and so on. And we will ask, okay, and this is clearly a normative question, not a purely scientific one. What is a safe and just operating, just means fair, safe and just operating space for humanity? And many would argue, and this is a normative claim as well, that development has to respect something. It must respect some constraints. And these constraints can be defined in terms of planetary boundary, as Röckström and others would argue. So maybe our pre-analytical intuition is that the ocean is a finite space as well, and maybe we have to discard the last and final illusion of infinity on planet Earth, which refers to the ocean, and now we have to recognize that we have to respect boundaries of the ocean space as well. And as you know, there is this process of the Sustainable Development Goals. I will say something about sustainability at the end of my talk, but here I just want to say that there is one Sustainable Development Goal, number 14. It has a very stupid title, Life Below Water, but it doesn't matter here. And this Sustainable Development Goal refers to the ocean, and it has been operationalized by targets, sub-targets, and indicators. And there is a political process ongoing, and our idea is that we might accompany this political process over the next years. So who we are, there is one center or two centerpieces of our structure. One centerpiece is Kiel Marine Sciences, with a tradition of 200 years back, and most faculties are somehow involved in Kiel Marine Sciences. So we have agriculture and nutritional sciences, we have medicine, we have law, we have engineering, and so on. So this is one centerpiece. Another centerpiece is GeoMar. GeoMar is a research center for marine sciences. It is funded by the German national agency as a so-called Helmholtz Institute. And in Kiel we have also a World Institute for Economics. And in the economic groups there are people interested in fisheries, and they are interested in development, economics, and related topics. And here we have an information center who does all these big data stuff and all these things about digitalization and visualization. And we have Muthesius Kunsthochschule, the College of Fine Arts, and we try to bring artists together with scientists, that they may exchange their views and maybe can disseminate and visualize ocean topics to a broader audience, and go into schools and work with pupils and so on. And this, then we have this Kiel Alliance of Integrative Marine Science. This is this kind of network. What disciplines are involved? Of course, we have marine sciences, as you see here. We have also marine technology, who is dealing with disaster management. There is one group about climate engineering, upwelling, and there is a group about aquacultures, where we try to conceive and design new systems as integrated multi-trophic aquacultures. We have 2 new professorates without tenure track, but we hope we can tenure them after 5 years. That's human geography. And human geography is dealing with migration in Oceania, and this has to do with climate refugees, sea level rise, and all the things, how people are talking about migration in Oceania and the small island states. And then we have political science, who is dealing with marine governance, especially with the governance process of the SDG 14. We have environmental economics with a focus on fisheries, North Atlantic and Baltic Sea. And the group of environmental economics also has theoretical ambitions, and they are conceiving sustainable development in terms of what they call inclusive wealth. And this inclusive wealth concept is very close to the total economic value scheme and to the ecosystem service approach, and it also incorporates the cultural services. Then we have Shipping Institute Law of the High Sea, with a special eye on new developments in seafloor governance, because there are a lot of initiatives worldwide who wish to go for deep sea mining, and there are a lot of governance and legal problems surrounding deep sea mining. And then, that's my part, that's environmental ethics or environmental philosophy, I'm dealing and reflecting upon the more normative questions, the moral questions which have to do with sustainability. I will say more about it at the end of my presentation, about the idea of a concept called strong sustainability. And I'm a little bit involved in a group who wish to conceive strategy for ocean recovery and restoration. And then informatics we have with all the big data, with digital ocean, and with strategy of visualization. So that's our network. And the idea was to move from marine sciences to a kind of inter and transdisciplinary research cluster, overcoming the divide between science and the humanities and integrating both ways of scholarship. We have, and now I come to the conceptual approach, we have three categories which define our interests of knowledge. In Germany we say Erkenntnisinteresse. The interests of knowledge give some kind of focus, and they think kinds of where we look at. We want to understand human pressures on the ocean, and pressure is one of our interests of knowledge. Resilience is a second interest of knowledge. Resilience both of natural systems, but also the resilience of coupled human and natural systems. Here we see replanting of some mangrove forest. And the third interest of knowledge is prosperity, richness, wealth, to see. And we won't mind to talk about the many ways the ocean can bring prosperity and wealth in a good sense to humanity. And so we hope not just for our generation, but for many generations to come. Under these three categories that define interest of knowledge, we have a stream. And the stream starts with discovery, goes to understanding, to assessment, and finally to solutions. And it goes from the pure science to a more policy-driven approach. It starts with sciences, and ocean discovery is really hard science. It is data mining, it is observation. We had a lot of facility in the ocean, and you see what the colleagues are doing here close to the seafloor. And then we want to understand complex interactive systems. What you see here is, of course, the ocean currents. And then, of course, here we might have climate change. We have melting ice shields, and we wish how they interact, which is other how stable the currents, the thermohaline circulation may be in the longer run. So we want to understand complex natural and human natural system understanding. And then we want to make assessments, not just predictions or forecasts, but also scenario writing. What might happen if we go this or that trajectory into the future? But if you start to do assessments And if you include scenario writing in your assessment, very many value-laden aspects pop up. What kind of a scenario is viable or feasible? Or what do we wish to have? And how might we choose between different scenarios? How can we introduce a betterness relation between scenarios and not just as a mere opinion say I like A over B over C over D, but give reason why some trajectory would be better, not for us, but perhaps for future generation, than another one. And then, of course, you have to argue on normative grounds, not on purely scientific ones. And finally, we want to ask what counts as sustainable solutions. And of course, there are so many ideas in the field with why not do something against climate change by means of artificial upwelling? Why not go for macroalgae cultivation to reach some objectives? Why not trying to replace terrestrial mining by seafloor mining? There are so many ideas what we can do, and we have to judge them. We have to judge them according to their desirability, to their feasibility, and whether they can be permitted on moral grounds, or whether there are severe moral concerns not to go this or that way. And this means we have to come into deliberation and debate about options, and then about courses of action, what might be obligatory, or might be permissible, or might be forbidden for whatever reasons. And as a philosopher, I wish to see, not just in Kiel, but all over the world, at many places, unconstrained debates of what will count as sustainable solution for ocean topics. And then, of course, we can come into debate here as well. Now you have three categories, and now you have the stream from discovery to solution. And then we have 6 what we call integrated research areas, which form specific scientific groups who meet at a regular base, try to get funded by European or German agencies, and have a special topic. One is, of course, ocean food, with fisheries, with aquaculture, and with some ideas about novel food, maybe with the macroalgae or other nutrients implied. And the normative idea behind is, how can we contribute to the enhancement of food security by this complementary relationship between wild fisheries, new types of aquacultures, and maybe new nutritional additives or something like this. But you see here that if you're talking about food and food security, you have some underlying normative premises that food security for a growing world population, especially in the global south, would be a good or mandatory thing to have. We have one group about ocean floor resources, which clearly is a contested topic. Then, of course, we can think about cobalt crusts, we can talk about sulfides, about uh, oil and gas hydrates. And then there is a question, is there such a thing as sustainable deep sea mining? One question, for instance, is, can we restore the seabed after this kind of really heavy human interference with the deep sea? And if we cannot restore, does this affect the legal and the moral debate about deep sea mining? Some people argue deep sea mining is not as bad as terrestrial mining because it is inaccessible to most human beings, but of course it is a heavy interference with the sea floor. And then of course a moral question comes up, why should we care for some kind of ecosystem which is inaccessible to most human beings? Why should we care about such kind of subterranean landscape at all? We're caring, I said something about pressure, about pollutants, and the group about pollutants has two subgroups. One is about the microplastic group, and the other is about the CO2 group. And the CO2 group thinks about carbon sequestration in the ocean. They are thinking about ocean alkalinization, and they're thinking about upwelling technologies and whether those kind, and some would say climate engineering strategies are permissible, and what are the risks, what are the side effects, and so on. We have a group about ocean disasters who want to install warning systems against hurricanes, tsunamis, and so on to protect coastal people. And then, of course, there is an underlying normative premise that we should protect people against those kind of incidents, and what we can do about it. As I said, I'm interested in ocean recovery, and ocean recovery has something to do with, can we recover under warming conditions? Can systems recover under conditions of acidification? What is about deoxygenation? Can we reverse it? What about maybe assisted evolution in coral reef? Assisted evolution, a contested topic, of course. And if we are coming into debate about ocean recovery, we see many values. And yesterday we had a debate about valuing nature at Coelus, about risks and uncertainties, obligations, many trade-offs, costs and benefits, and therefore recovery and restoration, I would say values, norms, all the way down. And all the people who are doing marine restoration, they now register how value-laden these topics are, I would say, all the way down. And then on a more meta level, we have a very young group. The group has formed less than 1 year ago, so it's in the infancy. So, but I want to say that there is this ocean narrative group, and we think that arguing and telling stories are two modes of communication. Science likes to argue, and philosophers do also, but many people are motivated far stronger by narratives, by stories, which incorporate meaning, which incorporate some kind of morals, or incorporate worldviews, and incorporate attitudes that human beings have toward the ocean, for instance. And what we want to do, and really we are in the beginning, we want to have a kind of a repository for many, many stories all around the world, and then we want to analyze it according to some kinds of categories we have here and we have in our sustainability. We want to know how people really, in ordinary language and in stories, are thinking about human-ocean relations. And then, of course, of the problem of language with the groups. I know some Greek, some ancient Greek, and I know Latin, and some other people know about. We have a Chinese research center, and of course, we have some people who speak very well Spanish and Portuguese. And then we want to disseminate, and we have a lot of learning networks. We had a lot of people who do these kind of multi-stakeholder involvement, citizen juries. So we want to disseminate our work to the public because we believe, and this is also a normative topic, that humans should have far more literacy about the ocean. Maybe we, or the most people we know of, are terrestrial beings who live a terrestrial life and are in some sense ignorant about ocean topics. But what in the world of the 21st century, maybe even terrestrial beings shouldn't be as ignorant about the ocean anymore, and so there is a point about dissemination and bring it to the broader public. Now I come to the final part of my talk, and this is a kind of reflection upon the ideas of sustainability. And I've argued that we have to find trajectories and pathways into a thing we call safe and just operating space for humanity. And there are a lot of trajectories, but we have to channel these trajectories through this SDG process because this is just things that are running. And of course, we could fail. Of course, we could remain on trajectories which do not bring us into a safe and operating, just operating space, but may lead us somewhere else. And if we want to talk about these pathways into a sustainable future and talk about sustainable development, then of course we have to reflect upon what do we mean by this umbrella term, or some would say by this often misused buzzword called sustainability. And there is a deep history of sustainability. In Germany, we have it since more than 300 years in forestry. The first source is Silvicultura Economica from 1713, where we have coined this term Nachhalt, so it's nothing new. And at the end of the 18th century, there was a great president of the United States of America, Thomas Jefferson, and he coined sustainability in just 7 words, saying the earth belongs in usufruct to the living. And one word is usufruct, that stems from the Latin. And usufruct means that you are constrained in utilization of natural resources. You should take the interest of a bountiful earth, but you should not. You should keep the substance intact. So there is this idea. There are substances or stocks, we would say perhaps natural capital, that should be kept intact over times, and we are entitled to live by the interests, but not by the substance. This is the earth belongs and usufruct to the living, and of course Jefferson influenced George Perkins Marsh in 1865, Man and Nature, and George Perkins Marsh influenced Thomas Pinchot in the forestry and so on. And there is a US tradition of sustainability, maybe leading to Elder Leopold, where Brian Norton has written so much about it. If I may, I would go briefly to the Kiel tradition. There was Carl August Möbius in the 19th century who applied the basic idea of sustainability stemming from forestry to the oyster banks of the North Sea, and he wished to define rules for the preservation and improvement of natural oyster banks. And he said the utilization should not be driven by societal demand, which leads to overutilization and leads to a tragedy of open access, but natural productivity of the oyster banks, they should be the normative yardstick for harvesting marine resources. I would say Möbius was way ahead in those days, and people could have learned or should have learned much from him. The new debate of sustainability starts with the so-called Brundtland report, and in the most quoted definition, it is said that sustainable development is development that meets the needs of present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Future generations are present in the definition, but nature has vanished. Only needs and the fulfillment of needs remains. And therefore, there is a kind of a split between the older tradition of sustainability and the more younger one. And I see the Sustainable Development Goals in the tradition of the Brundtland report. And then we have to ask, how can the older and the younger tradition be reconciled in the SDG process? I would like to bring more of the older traditions into the recent debate. We can learn from the very, very old literature sometimes a lot. In Kiel, we reflect on concepts of sustainability. The most trivial one is a so-called three-pillar model. Then you have economy, social life, and some environment, and then you may have some circles, and there's something in between, and this is then sustainable development. I do not like this very much. It's a very trivialized conception. And then, of course, we have the sustainable development goals in the tradition of Brundtland report. And what you see here is the most refined economic concept at the moment. It argues that the wealth of societies stem from different type of capital. Capital are stocks that yield the flow, and just to have this neutral concept of capital, it's neutral with respect to property rights, and therefore if we talk about capital, we are not just capitalistic, and so but we talk about stocks that yields the flow. And then there is manufactured capital, there is human capital, there is natural capital as a real type of capital. And the problem is, can we substitute between types of capital? Because economists like substituting assets against other assets who bring maybe more wealth, more living standard. But the inclusive wealth concept argues that we should keep an eye of natural capital, and if natural capital has been depleted in the past, we should invest in natural capital as well. And what is investment in natural capital in economic parlance is restoration and recovery in more ecological parlance. And then there is a concept of strong sustainability. This says, okay, we are embedded, all social systems are embedded in natural systems, and we have to respect some kinds of boundaries. Boundaries we cannot derive from science alone, but we need some normative principle as a precautionary principle, a constant natural capital rule, a safe minimum standard, or things like this to define prudent and objectives and boundaries. So we are in the debate. And my arguments would say, if we take some arguments about here seriously, we will move towards the concept of strong sustainability. I come to the end. We have contributed to the debate. Our economic groups, Martin Quast, what is sustainability economics? Martin Fisbeck, who's a speaker of the cluster Future Ocean Sustainability, together with some people in the group, securing blue wealth, the need for a special sustainable development goal for the ocean and coasts. And if you want to read something about strong sustainability, I can recommend this article being published last year about strong sustainability in coastal areas. So we want to refine this normative debate, and it's so great to see scientists saying, yes, we have to reflect upon these normative stuff, and this does not impair our scientific quality. We can remain outstanding, excellent scientists, and we will not do worse science if we recognize that there are normative topics on the table. So that's it, and maybe we can find some ideas for exchange and for debates between here, the Oregon State University and Kiel University in Germany. Thank you for listening.
We have time for questions, comments.
Yeah, please.
So where do you find the consensus for the normative? I mean, we are experiencing in the U.S. a sort of collapse of that consensus. Polarized politics that reflect polarized views of deeper philosophical issues.
My ethical framework theory is called discourse ethics. It has its roots in the Frankfurt School of Thought, and the most prominent figure is Jürgen Habermas, who has developed this kind of discourse ethics. The idea is that if we exchange our opinions and our views, then we are looking for some common moral ground. So if we are really seriously debate normative topics, we want to overcome mere egoism or mere egotistic attitudes, and because we want to exchange views to each another, yes? And by ways of exchanging arguments, maybe we can find some commonly shared moral ground from which we can build up then more other policy things. And of course, I would say even a liberal, democratic society with so many views and with so many voices and opinions cannot do ultimately without some normative common moral ground. We have to restabilize further on and on. And of course, it is highly problematic if this common moral grounds erodes in a society, because then cohesion weakens, the society becomes more fragmented, people look with suspicion to each other, and so on and so on. And I very dearly hope that this will not happen to the United States of America. We have had this in our German history quite often, and ultimately it turned out a moral catastrophe and a disaster. So we have always tried to figure out how can we stabilize this fragile common moral grounds. And there is no other way than arguing. There is no other way than sound moral arguing. I don't have to say more about this. First,
I have a question. I'm not even really sure how to ask this. In a
Pardon?
couple of your models, you had economy in the
Yeah.
center or the middle or some part of it. And I kind of wonder if sustainability and economy even really go together.
Yeah.
It seems like the economy always hurts sustainability.
I would like to draw a distinction between economic as these real world business and economics as a theoretical enterprise. And I would say there are not just economists, there are different schools of economists. There's one school of economists, I would say this is a kind of just growth theory, that's Solow and other people. And in this kind of utilitarian growth theory, you can, for instance, discount future states of affairs by a rate of discounts that equals the market rate of interests. But then, if you can discount future states of affairs, the remote future doesn't matter anymore. You can discount all long-term problems just away. Climate change, ocean acidification doesn't matter anymore if your rate of discount is 5% each year monotonously over decades. But there are other economists, and I'm in debate with, I would say, prudent and reflected economists who say, okay, we know what assumptions are in our models, and we are willing to debate these assumptions with the philosophers, because economics ultimately is a moral enterprise. And in all economic models, there are so many vested normative assumptions which you have to bring to the forefront. And then you say, okay, what are you doing in your model? What's your rate of discount? What's the rate of elasticity of substitution? What is the assumption about the marginal utility of one additional unit of consumption in the future? And then the economists have to make the assumption very clear, and then we can have a normative and an ethical debate in between ethicists and economists. Great economists have always been philosophers. Adam Smith, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill. And what I see, even in the US, I see a camp of stubborn, narrow-minded economists who just perform their models and do these kind of cost-benefit analysis, discounting all the problems away. This here, and as I said, it's a more refined version. This is not just this a narrow-minded way of doing economic theory because it takes very serious the future, distributive fairness in between an ongoing chain of generation. So, sorry, stop here. You see, I like to debate with economists. I would say there are camps in economics, thought, yes, and you must take a close look what economics you're coming within, and we should overcome this narrow-minded cost-benefit analysis. Well, sorry, you.
I wonder about the shifting values or normative values over time, and how they, again, you have suggested there have been disasters in the past in certain societies, and if you look at, certainly people are far more familiar with the terrestrial environments. And if we look at the human record of what has gone on with our civilization, I'm not sure it would stand, a normative, sustainable sort of valuation in its current state. Mm-hmm. So I wonder about, moving towards the oceans. Maybe there has been far less change over time in those environments to date, but I don't know. You obviously are very optimistic about the possibilities.
I would say we are not on a sustainable pathway yet, but we have taken maybe some steps away from clearly unsustainable pathways. So we are in the middle of things, and I would say the great game is still open. And I think scientists, concerned scientists, and people coming from the humanities have a word to say in this great game. So people argue that we have now entered a new epoch of the history of planet Earth. They call it the Anthropocene. You have heard maybe about it. But we as humans live not in the Anthropocene as the dinosaurs have lived in their period of planet Earth, because the Anthropocene, we are the makers. We are performing the Anthropocene on a daily basis at producers, at consumers, at tourists, and so on and so on. Whatever the Anthropocene may mean, it implies a high level of responsibility, because now it's our period of this wonderful planet Earth. And maybe I bring some emphasis. It was my final slide, and we have in the SDG 14 a wonderful metaphor, a healthy ocean. And we asked what would be a healthy ocean in the Anthropocene. And this idea have a vision on this, and maybe this kind of moral imagination may motivate people to think different about human ocean. Please. And there is the idea by Aldo Leopold, who was a US conservationist. And Aldo Leopold said a thing is right if it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community, and it is false if it tends otherwise, quote, and I try to reinterpret Aldo Leopold's famous statements with respect to the ocean, and I said maybe we should respect the fertility and the wonderful, abundant productivity of the marine systems where life ultimately stems from, and we should endorse this kind of fertility. And we should endorse and strive for the resilience of human nature system against disturbance in the past. And last but not least, we should keep a sense of wonder. Sorry to say you are in marine science, but sometimes in philosophy we say philosophy starts with wonderment, how things are, taumatseo, it's in the ancient Greek. Ich staune, I'm wondering and I'm amazed about what there is. Even if I'm familiar as a marine science, sometimes there is this sense of wonderment and being amazed about what there is. And this sense of wonderment about the diversity, maybe the coral reefs, the richness, the grandeur, and even maybe it gives you an attitude of awe. To some people, it might come close to a religious or a spiritual attitude, as it was in ancient times when the Stoic philosophers were on the coastlines, looked upon the ocean, and they had this idea that the awe, the grandeur, has something to do with the calmness of the soul, and so on and so on. So we are in philosophy. And if you see this, and then you know that the game is still open, maybe you do not ask so much what was in the past, but what, sozusagen, is ahead in front of us. What do we have to do in the next decade? Not to think about 100,000 of years back or forth, but to ask, okay, what are we going to do in this first or second century when humans have become aware that they really are making the Anthropocene? So it's up to us, and the game is still open.
If there are no more questions, thank you very much, Konrad.